Hi guys, I'm gonna talk to you about chapters 8, is that right? 8 through 12, yeah, of Angela's Ashes, and I'm gonna try to make it pretty quick because I'm working from home today and I left my charger at school and I'm at 21%. So let's go ahead and get going on this. First of all, in chapter 8, we're starting off where Frank is 10, and he is going to be confirmed in a church. And I have always been a little confused about what confirmation means, but I think from what I understand, it's like you're officially a member of the church now. I think that's it. But he's excited about it because it's a big deal and because he gets another chance at the collection, which we know he didn't have when he did his first communion because he threw up and got sick. So again, this kind of just speaks to the importance of religion because a lot of his major life events in his early life, in his childhood, were centered around religion. It's like first communion, first confession, confirmation, all this stuff is like they're big life events for him. He's excited about the collection again, but this time instead of spending money on movies, he decides to spend the money by paying his friend to let him look at his sisters while they shower. So clearly Frank is growing up a little bit, doing some naughty things. And his friend is doing some even naughtier things, or things that would definitely be perceived as naughty by the Catholic Church, especially back then. But also just kind of creepy to be like watching girls. Also in this chapter, things are falling off my table. Also in this chapter, Frank gets typhoid fever, which we find out because he gets a nosebleed at his confirmation. God, these religious events just never go well for him. But he gets typhoid fever. He has to go in the hospital, and it's so bad that they literally think he's going to die. And they call a priest to give him his last rites. But he obviously, there's the rest of the book, so he does not die. He does meet a friend while he's in the hospital. He meets a little girl named Patricia who has diphtheria, and they strike up this friendship, and their whole thing is that they read together. She reads books to him, mostly poetry, until this one nurse, Sister Rita, I think, I could be making that up, decides that socializing is not good for either of them. And so she moves Frank to a different wing. He still does manage to find a friend there. He makes friends with the janitor named Seamus, who he pops back up later in the book too, in one of these other chapters that we read for this week. And he's obviously like really sad about being separated from his friend. And they were reading this one poem, The Highwayman, and Frank is bummed because he's never gonna find out how it ends. So dear darling Seamus learns the rest of the poem so that he can recite it to Frank, and Frank can figure out the ending. Just so nice. He does wind up spending a whole month in bed after his long stay in the hospital. He's been out for so long that they tell him that he's going to have to repeat a grade at school because he's missed so much. And he's really bummed about that because he wants to be with his friends, and also because he would be in a class with his little brother Malachi, and how embarrassing would that be? And in the end, he writes a story that proves to his teacher that he's good enough to be in the 6th grade. And so they allow him to remain in the 6th grade, or to move up to the 6th grade. And his teacher, Mr. O'Halloran, is awesome, and he like really respects him. He says that they, he's not like a super strict disciplinarian, doesn't like expect more of them than kids can logically give. He lets them like ask questions. He encourages them to ask questions and think for themselves. So it sounds like Mr. O'Halloran's a pretty good teacher. When we move on to chapter 9, war has broken out all over Europe, and Irishmen are being recruited to work in factories. So that sounds pretty good. It sounds like maybe Malachi Sr. can actually earn a living for his family. So he goes to England, and he's supposed to be sending money every 2 weeks. But to no one's surprise, he does not do that. They just don't have any money now. Frank gets pink eye, which is the common term for conjunctivitis. And his pink eye is bad enough to send him to the hospital for another month. It hasn't even been that long since he was in the hospital for a long time with typhoid fever, and now he's got this as well. So after that, Bridie Hannon finds out that Malachi Sr. is drinking so much that he literally can't even pay his rent, much less send money to them. And Angela decides that she has to ask for help from the dispensary, which she says is a level above street beggars. So they are as desperate as they've ever been, but no worries, it's going to get even worse. She has to go to the dispensary for help, and there's the two guys who are in charge there, Mr. Coffee and Mr. Kane, and they're just huge jerks. They like made fun of Frank when they first went to the dispensary to get help, to get medicine and like a doctor's note and stuff. So they're huge jerks. They humiliate Angela, but they do eventually give her what she needs. However, moving on to chapter 10, I told you I was going to try and make this quick today. Angela is very sick. She gets very sick. And because of that, Frank kind of takes it upon himself to steal bread and lemonade, which is a real, if you're familiar with Les Miserables, it's a real Jean Valjean moment, because it's sort of that conundrum of like, is it actually a crime? And I think we talked about this before we started this book. Is it a crime to steal if you're trying to provide for your family? And I remember that you guys said it can be both. It can be a crime, but also be justifiable, which I think is absolutely accurate and a good way of thinking critically about that. Not everything is black and white. So Frank does what he has to do. And then the boys actually skip school to take care of Angela. They steal coal from their neighbors so they can afford, or so they can manage to make a fire. But the attendance guard shows up. How would you guys feel if, when you guys didn't come to school, Miss Blackmore just showed up at your house and was like, I demand to know why you're not at school? So the attendance guard shows up, and he tells them to go get their grandma and Aunt Aggie. And they tell him what's up. Like they tell Grandma and Aunt Aggie that they had to stay home and take care of Mom. And so at that point, they kind of intervene and realize that Angela really is sick. And she is taken to the hospital because she has pneumonia. And the boys live with Aunt Aggie for a little bit, which is not great. Aunt Aggie's pretty mean, but Uncle Pa is really nice and like gives them ham and stuff. This part actually just made me question, like, golly, Frank has been in 2 long hospital stays. Now Angela is stayed in the hospital for a long time. And it just made me think, like, what were medical bills like at that point? Or, in Ireland, because most countries have different kind of healthcare than we do. And most countries, it does not cost what it costs here to stay in the hospital. But I know that I would be totally up the creek without a paddle if I had to spend a month in the hospital. Like, I would never pay off those hospital bills. So I can only imagine what sort of hospital bills they were dealing with from all of these extended stays. So after that, Frank writes to Dad at Aunt Aggie's encouragement, writes to Malachi Sr. and tells him what's going on. And he does show back up. He comes back from England and takes them back home. But don't give him too much credit. Angela comes home from the hospital 2 days after that, and Malachi immediately goes back to England, goes back to drinking all of his paychecks away, doesn't send them anything. So, it was nice of him to show up and take care of his kids for all of 2 days. Chapter 11, Frank makes a big discovery, which is he's snooping through his parents' stuff and finds their marriage certificate. And when he sees the date of that and he figures out his own birthday, he suddenly for the first time realizes that he was born out of wedlock. He like talks to his friend Mikey Malloy about it, and Mikey Malloy says something about how he's a doomed bastard, because I guess a bastard, yes, we use that as an insult these days, but it just means that you are a child born out of wedlock. In fact, I remember a couple of years ago when I taught this, we were talking about like what that word means and how it can be used as an insult and stuff. And one of the kids just like kind of asked everybody, like, were your parents married when you were born? And everyone else was. And he was like, am I the only bastard here? I always thought that was very funny. But he is afraid that he's doomed, because apparently it was a sin to be a bastard, even though you certainly can't help it. It's not your fault. And he's worried about being doomed. Also in this chapter, on the brighter side of things, Frank gets a job. He starts helping Mr. Hannon with the coal delivery, because Mr. Hannon has sores on his legs and he can't do it. And Mr. Hannon really becomes kind of a father figure for Frank. He's very caring towards him. He is very kind. He takes care of him as best he can. He even says something about how he thought of him like a son, which, since we know all the things that we know about Frank's actual dad, he probably needed a strong father figure. This is not the best job for Frank, because he's working in a coal factory and the coal dust hurts his eyes, which he's already had issues with his eyes from the pink eye. And Mom is going to make him quit because it hurts his eyes so bad and they're getting so much worse. But eventually Mr. Hannon's legs give out on him and he can't do the job anymore. And since Frank was kind of his like apprentice or whatever, he doesn't have a job anymore. He was cool though when he had a job. He felt really cool because Mr. Hannon like picked him up in a coal or a horse cart, and he got to like take the reins and sort of drive, and all the kids who watched him pull away from school thought he was really cool. So moving on to chapter 12, which is the last chapter you guys had to read for today. It's Christmas time, and Malachi Sr. says that he's coming home for Christmas. He writes him a letter, says he's coming home for Christmas, and he's bringing gifts. That sounds awesome, and like everything they've been hoping for. So they go to the train station. They're like waiting on his train to get in. They're so excited. They're like awaiting his arrival, and he doesn't show up. He does wind up showing up a day late, but not only is he a day late after they went to all that effort to try to meet him at the train station and everything, he has 2 black eyes, he has no front teeth, and the only gift he has is a half-eaten box of chocolates. So pretty classic Malachi, I would say. And not only that, but he shows up, they have their Christmas dinner, and he leaves like immediately after dinner. So it really sort of seems like he doesn't have a whole lot of interest in being with his family. And to Frank's credit, I guess, this is really the first time that he starts exhibiting some anger towards his dad. All the times that he has been describing Malachi's like drinking habits and how he like wastes all their money and everything, it's always been pretty matter of fact. Like he hasn't seemed super resentful of it. He's just been like, well, that's dad for you. But this, for the first time, he's really exhibiting some anger. Like when his mom is upset that he doesn't show up, he essentially is like, you know who he is though. Like, don't you expect this by now? Like, I don't think it's worth getting upset about. He doesn't care about us. And I'm sure that Malachi Sr. would probably argue that fact and say that he did care about his family, but in all the ways that matter, in action, he doesn't care for his family. He does not send them money. He doesn't take care of them. So I think Frank's anger is pretty justified there. Also in this chapter, we see sort of a similarity between Angela and Michael, the third youngest brother. They both have really big hearts, especially for people who are people who are like have less than they do, or who are unfortunate in some kind of way. So his mom keeps bringing old women and children, or poor women and children, home to give them bread and tea, even though that's probably something that she should not be, like, she can't really afford to keep doing that, but she does, just because she's got such a big heart, such a tender heart. And it turns out that Michael does too. He doesn't keep inviting poor women and children, he keeps inviting old men and sick dogs. And I mean, that's so cute and sweet, but unfortunately one of these old men brings lice with him, and they all get lice, which kind of puts pin to the whole bringing people and dogs home thing. Also during this chapter, we kind of meet Mrs. Purcell, who is a woman that Frank goes to listen to her radio. And this is really where we get a lot of his early dreaming about going to America, primarily because he listens to American jazz, and also Shakespeare plays, which is cool. But I'm a little partial to Shakespeare myself, but he listens to American jazz, thinks it's so cool, and he starts dreaming about leaving Ireland and going to America, which is one of the major sort of dreams he has for the rest of the book. That's like his main goal, is to be able to leave Ireland and go back to America. In addition, at the end of this chapter, something very sad happens. No one else dies. No more kids die. But they get evicted because they're so behind on rent. Thanks, Malachi. They're like 4 months behind or something, which I don't know if you guys are familiar with the rent system here, but like if you don't pay your rent for a month around here, you're going to be evicted. So, or at least if you live in an apartment and don't have like some arrangement with somebody. But they get evicted, and Grandma suggests that they move in with Layman, who is Angela's cousin, because he has a steady job. He makes pretty good money. He's family, so it feels like he might be sort of obligated to take them in. But he's kind of awful in a lot of ways. Like, he's really rude to Angela. He makes her clean out his chamber pot, which I think we talked about what that is before, but she's like throwing out his poop every day. So that's really gross and demeaning. His place is really dirty. They have to clean it up. He also gets drunk a lot on the weekends and stuff. I think probably the one good thing about him is that he lets Frank use his library card, which is cool. And then at the end, it points out, I said nobody else died, but then I corrected it to no kids died, because by the end of this chapter, Grandma is dead. And Angela is kind of just like sad and looking back on like how many people she's lost, which she has. We know that she's lost all these kids. Now her mother is dead, and then she sort of loses Malachi Jr. because he goes off to Dublin to join the Army School of Music, which is essentially just like a school run by the Army for kids who show some musical aptitude so that they could potentially play in the Army band later on. So that is the end of chapter 12. After you after you look at this, you can go fill out your discussion posts for today. And that is all. Bye.